While all the noise out there is coronavirus, spikes, deaths, China, Wuhan, all this other crap, Iran hasn't been in the headlines since we took out their number one general that was fomenting terrorism across the Middle East. But we got to check back in because some bad things are happening there. And we're joined once again by our buddy Michael Johns. He's a policy analyst and writer, former speechwriter for George H.W. Bush, one of the co-founders of the Tea Party movement. Also participated in a conference call today, the Free Iran Global Teleconference of Iranian Democracy Advocates. Mike, what the heck is going on in Iran?
Well, I mean, historically, we can start with maybe learning a pretty solid lesson from, I think, Carter's mismanagement in 1979, in the sense that, he really isolated the Shah over some human rights concerns. The Shah was a great ally of the United States of America, and as a result of that, the Shah fell, and in came Khomeini and the hardline regime, which has been one of the greatest enemies of the United States since 1979. Has been fomenting terrorism globally, as the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Continues a very aggressive nuclear weapons program in violation of the agreement that it signed not to do so, and is really abusing human rights in one of the most, it's really one of the worst human rights records of any country in the world. Now, when you have a regime like this that is not really supported by the people, and in fact, the people are pushing back and rebelling the best they can with very limited, almost no support, the regime is acting very defensively. Earlier this week, there were 3 young Iranian men that were scheduled to be put to death, hung to death, and I involved myself with a grouping of people to try to build some pressure on the regime to spare these individuals. It's a perfect example of the regime, utilizing excessive acts of crackdown to protect its power and to send a message to its regime send a message to the people of Iran that it's prepared to do just about anything to maintain power. So this morning, I did have a chance, as you referenced, to participate in what I think is a very important annual call of a coalition of opponents of the regime. None of these groups are perfect, so it's not like an issue of apologizing for them. I faced a lot of this when I supported the Reagan doctrine in the 1980s, when we were trying to get rid of communism and Soviet involvement around the world. But there were a good number of Americans. I mean, Giuliani spoke, Newt Gingrich spoke, Stephen Harper, the former Prime Minister of Canada, spoke. So it's nice to see some prominent Western figures beginning to offer words of support to those who are involved in trying to bring about a change of regime in Iran. And, for a long time, and this came out a lot in the Trump campaign, I think we've been torn between these 2 extreme policies, one of sort of putting up with this regime and all of the costs of its presence, and 2, being drawn into some engaged military conflict with it. And it's sort of intriguing to ask whether there's not some middle ground position where those individuals who are seeking change of government could not be supported in a way that would both assist them in that task and also prepare us for what could be the ultimate inevitability of this regime's collapse.
It's, everyone said going back, I guess, a few months ago, when Trump took out the head general there, we're going to be at war with Iran and all this other stuff. It turns out that, they're basically turning themselves on themselves because the people there are still not happy with what they're getting, and the government, they don't have a president now that's sending them over, hundreds of billions of dollars in cash. So they're kind of painting themselves into a corner a bit, right?
That's correct. I mean, there's no doubt the Obama agreement, which released billions of dollars, $150 billion that we had frozen after the revolution, and I think a little less than $2 billion that ostensibly was owed to them for some deal during the Shah on military weapons that weren't delivered, has, they turned around and poured that money into nuclear weapons development, into support for these terrorist movements like Hezbollah, like Hamas, like the Houthis, which are behind the entire civil war in Yemen, all over the world. In fact, they've sent agents into even Europe to assassinate perceived Iranian exiled opponents of the regime. And this was all done by, essentially, this has all been led by the IRGC, their top military unit, which was run by General Soleimani, who President Trump very bravely and correctly and wisely removed from the battlefield in early January of this year. And you're exactly right also. There was a lot of prediction at that time, John, that there would be this massive retaliation against the United States. And I can remember debating some liberals at the time and saying that actually this was a de-escalating, not an escalating measure, in the sense that it really removed and reduced the military capability of Iran to do harm to Western interests. And that was scoffed at. But I think, we're 7 months down the road, and things are definitely not perfect. There's a lot of instability. Iran continues to be a real threat in a lot of ways. But I think it's basically proven to be true that this is undeniably proven to be in the interest of peace and stability and American interests.
Yeah, no, listen, I was thrilled when we finally had a president who was willing to go out there and take out people we knew that had American blood on their hands and were trying to destabilize places where we were spending resources to stabilize and help stay free. Iran is not on the top of the headlines, but thank God we have you, Mike, to be right on top of it for us. I really appreciate it, and hopefully next week you'll have another spicy subject for us for Freaky Friday. Thank you so much.
You're good. Have a good weekend, John.
Michael Johns, one of the great guys we have on the show. He's one of our guests that know where the rubber meets the road, that's for sure. And when America went through a major upheaval back in the early 2000s and the Tea Party emerged as a major political force, Michael Johns was right there at the front of it as one of the co-founders.